My boss enlists me in hiding his multiple affairs from his wife. 5 years ago, when I was 23, I worked at a company that specialized in hospitality training. My responsibilities and the specifics of the job weren't particularly relevant, but I had been with the company for about 3 years. During this time, I met Mark, who was hired around the same time as me. We went through a lot of training together, were placed in the same call center group, and naturally, we became very close friends. We often hung out after work since we lived close to each other and were both unattached at the time. Our bond was so tight that people at work frequently joked about us dating, suggesting we should just ignore company policies and start a relationship. We always laughed it off, though. We had made it clear to each other early on that our relationship was strictly platonic. I don't even remember how that conversation came up, but it did. And we both agreed that friendship was all we wanted from each other. For 2.5 years, Mark and I were practically inseparable. We were each other's confidants, sharing everything from work-related stress to personal issues. We spent countless evenings together, cooking dinner, watching movies, and simply enjoying each other's company. That was until I met Paul, who was 29 at the time. Paul and I hit it off immediately, and we started dating. Initially, Paul and Mark got along reasonably well. They would occasionally join me for dinner or a movie night, and everything seemed harmonious. However, a few months into my relationship with Paul, things began to change. Paul started to get upset if I wanted to grab dinner with Mark after work. Even if Paul was working late, he became increasingly possessive and jealous. Despite this, Mark seemed to understand Paul's perspective and would only join me for dinner if I specifically asked him to. He never initiated it himself, respecting the boundaries that Paul's jealousy had created. On my 24th birthday, I decided to throw a party at my apartment. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration, a night filled with laughter and fun. Paul had initially agreed to help me get supplies for the party, but at the last minute he flaked out, leaving me in a lurch. Mark, ever the reliable friend, stepped in without hesitation. He helped me get everything I needed and even bought most of the booze for the party. The night began with a buzz of excitement and chatter as friends filled my apartment. Paul showed up an hour after most of the other guests had arrived, his late entrance noticeable and somewhat dampening my mood. As the night wore on, people began to leave, one by one, with a few too drunk to drive crashing in the living room. Eventually, it was just me, Paul, and Mark left awake. Mark, noticing my exhaustion and inebriated state, insisted that I go to bed. It was my birthday after all, and he argued that it wasn't right for me to clean up after my own party. I said goodnight to everyone, and Paul helped me back to my room. I was so inebriated that while I remember the night, I also remember being very off my normal composure. Paul gently laid me down on my side, facing the wall, and then left. I quickly dozed off, feeling the effects of the alcohol lulling me into a deep, heavy sleep. The next thing I remember is loud music blaring in the room and feeling completely bound. My mind was foggy, still drunk, but I realized I was tied to the bed. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the restraints, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt someone on top of me, with a hand pressing my head into the pillow, preventing me from seeing anything. I could feel someone fumbling to pull my pajamas down and shoving their hand against me. Fear and confusion overwhelmed me. Suddenly, there was a pounding at the door, followed by a loud crack as it burst open. Mark and Paul's voices erupted in a heated argument, their shouts blending into a cacophony of anger and accusations. The pressure on my head lifted, and I could see one of them pulling the other away. But in the darkness, I couldn't tell who was who. There was a lot of screaming and crashing. A few minutes later, Paul came back into the room and untied me. He held me tightly, telling me that Mark had tried to rape me. I was horrified, my mind reeling from the shock and betrayal. I wanted to file a police report, but Paul convinced me not to, arguing that he had arrived in time and nothing had happened. I should have seen this as a red flag, but I was so relieved to have been saved that I believed him. I took a few days off work, blocked Mark on all social media, but not before he texted me, trying to tell me that Paul had attacked me and he had been the one to save me. I didn't believe him because it was Paul who came in and untied me. If Paul had been the one trying to harm me, why would he do that? Plus, we were dating and it just didn't make sense to me. I thought Mark had snapped or something. I ended up quitting my job before my time off was over because I had been looking for a career advancement opportunity anyway, and this seemed like the perfect time to move on. Paul and I continued dating for about 6 months until I caught him cheating on me with a coworker. In hindsight, this should have been a significant red flag too, but at the time, I was trying to distance myself from the traumatic event. Life moved on. I got comfortable in my new job, stayed away from getting too friendly with anyone from work, and never had a close male friend again. Occasionally, I'd see Mark at the grocery store or around town. We both still lived in the same area and hadn't moved. Despite seeing him, I never felt the need to confront him, and he always kept his distance. Recently, I received a notification that Paul had messaged me. It was odd because I had blocked him, but he had created a new account. Out of curiosity, I opened the message. Paul confessed to being an alcoholic and had been for years, even when we first started dating. He admitted to showing up to work drunk and getting fired for assaulting a receptionist. He was in court-mandated AA and was trying to make amends with those he had wronged because of his addiction. Paul then confessed that Mark had never tried to rape me. It was him. He had been jealous of my friendship with Mark and saw an opportunity to get rid of him. He described in detail how he had secretly tied me to the bed after seeing how drunk I was getting, planning to make it look like Mark had tried to assault me. He remembered everything, from setting the ties on the bed to beating Mark and threatening to kill him if he went to the police. Reading his message made me physically sick. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and betrayal. I had believed Paul and cut Mark out of my life based on his lies. I started drinking, trying to decide what to do next. I knew I needed to call my therapist, but my thoughts kept going back to Mark and how he must have felt betrayed by me. I unblocked Mark on all social media, contemplating whether to message him or not. Logically, I knew Paul should be the one to make amends, but he might not be able to find Mark. I felt it was my responsibility to reach out. I started drafting a message, unsure of what to say. How could I apologize for not believing him when he had tried to save me? I reached out to my therapist, who was shocked by the revelation but extremely supportive. She helped me process everything and encouraged me to file a police report. I did, providing screenshots of Paul's confession. My therapist also insisted that I write to Mark, suggesting that he deserved to know the truth and have some closure. I spent several days drafting and redrafting my message to Mark. Here's what I finally sent. Hi Mark, this is out of the blue, and I really don't know how to start this, so I'll just put it out there. I'm sorry for not listening to you. Paul messaged me last week and revealed everything, and I'm just sorry. This isn't easy to write, and you deserve so much more than just an apology so long after the fact. There's no excuse for me not giving you the benefit of the doubt. I let myself be stupidly gaslighted by a psychopathic maniac. This is the message he sent me. It even confesses to an assault on you in the event that you'd like to press charges against him, as I have already filed a police report for what he did to me. If you want to talk about any of this, my inbox is open. If you want to tell me to fuck off, I understand that too. I'm not sure what I expect because this has reopened a wound I had been trying to heal, and I'm sure it might cause you distress, but I felt you deserve to know. Mark read the message the next day and replied, I wish you would have listened to me back then, but I'm glad you know the truth. He explained that he had filed an assault report the day after my birthday, but the police had warned him against accusing Paul of sexual assault given my reaction at the time. Nothing had come of his police report, but he intended to follow up now. Mark is still the kind person I remembered. While I braced for him to hold a grudge, he expressed happiness that I finally knew the truth. We exchanged small talk, but it wasn't like our old conversations. He's now engaged and busy with work and planning his wedding. He suggested meeting for coffee with his fiancée and a friend of mine, if I felt more comfortable. I texted my friend Jenny, who stayed with me after I learned the truth, and she said she'd be with me either way. So we might get coffee this weekend and see where things go from there. The days leading up to our coffee meeting were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a mix of anxiety, anticipation, and guilt. I spent hours talking to my therapist, trying to prepare myself for the encounter. My therapist emphasized the importance of being honest and open, acknowledging my mistakes, and giving Mark the space to express his feelings. I replayed the scenarios in my mind, thinking about what I would say and how he might react. On the day of the meeting, Jenny picked me up and we drove to the cafe. My heart raced as we walked in, scanning the room for Mark. He was already there, sitting at a table with his fiancée. Seeing him again after so many years brought a flood of memories and emotions. He looked more mature, his face carrying the weight of the past few years. But there was still a kindness in his eyes that I remembered so well. We approached the table and Mark stood up to greet us. His fiancée, a warm and friendly woman named Emily, smiled and introduced herself. We exchanged pleasantries, and I felt a small sense of relief that Emily seemed supportive and understanding. As we settled into our seats, an awkward silence fell over the table. I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. Mark, I can't begin to express how sorry I am for everything that happened. I was completely wrong, and I let myself be manipulated by Paul. I should have listened to you, and I regret how things turned out. Mark nodded, his expression serious but not angry. I appreciate you reaching out and telling me the truth. It's something I've carried with me for a long time, and it means a lot to hear you say that. Emily placed her hand on Mark's, offering silent support. Jenny, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand under the table, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I've filed a police report against Paul, I continued, and I've shared his confession with the authorities. I know it won't undo the past, but I hope it helps in some way. Mark sighed, a mixture of relief and lingering frustration evident on his face. I filed an assault report back then, but nothing came of it. Maybe now, with your report, something will finally be done. It's been a long time coming. We talked for a while longer, discussing the events of that night and the impact it had on both of our lives. Mark shared how the incident had affected him, his career, and his relationships. He spoke about the anger and betrayal he felt, but also about his journey to move past it and build a new life with Emily. Hearing Mark's side of the story was both heartbreaking and cathartic. It made me realize the full extent of the damage Paul had caused, and how much I had been complicit in that harm by not believing Mark. It was a painful truth to confront, but necessary for both of us to heal. As our conversation wound down, Mark looked at me with a softened expression. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were, but I appreciate you reaching out and making things right. It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong, and I respect that. Emily smiled and added, We're planning our wedding for next spring. Maybe we can keep in touch and you can join us for the celebration. It could be a new beginning. The idea of attending Mark and Emily's wedding felt both daunting and hopeful. It was an opportunity to mend broken bridges and build new, healthier relationships. I nodded, feeling a sense of tentative optimism. I'd like that, I said. Thank you for giving me a chance to make amends. I know it won't be easy, but I'm committed to doing what I can to make things right. We finished our coffee and parted ways, promising to stay in touch. As Jenny and I walked back to the car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't complete absolution, but it was a step towards healing and redemption. Over the next few months, I continued therapy and worked on rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, focused on my career, and slowly began to let go of the guilt that had haunted me for so long. Mark and I exchanged occasional messages, keeping the lines of communication open. It was a gradual process, but it felt good to know that we were both moving forward. When spring arrived, I received an invitation to Mark and Emily's wedding. It was a beautiful, heartfelt ceremony filled with love and joy. Seeing Mark so happy and surrounded by supportive friends and family was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. I was grateful to be there, not just as a guest, but as someone who had played a small part in his journey to happiness. As I watched Mark and Emily exchange vows, I reflected on the past 5 years and the twists and turns that had led us to this moment. Life had a way of surprising us, challenging us, and ultimately teaching us valuable lessons. I had learned the importance of trust, honesty, and the courage to face our mistakes head-on. After the ceremony, Mark and I shared a quiet moment, standing under a canopy of blooming flowers. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "It means a lot to have you here." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," I replied, feeling a sense of closure and peace. "Congratulations to both of you. I'm so happy for you and Emily." We hugged, and in that embrace, I felt the weight of the past finally lift. It was a new beginning, not just for Mark and Emily, but for me as well. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but I knew that with the lessons I had learned and the support of my friends, I could face whatever came next with strength and resilience. As I left the wedding, I took one last look at the happy couple, knowing that this was a turning point in my life. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I was ready to embrace the future, one step at a time, with hope and determination. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, I walked into the next chapter of my life, grateful for the lessons learned and the opportunity to make things right. It was a long and challenging journey, but one that ultimately led to healing, forgiveness, and the promise of brighter days ahead.